Union strength grows. By late November 1863, the Union Army in Chattanooga was transformed. What had been a starving, cornered force only a month earlier now swelled with reinforcements. General Joseph Hooker, commanding troops from the Army of the Potomac, had marched from Bridgeport to the city. His men, seasoned by the Eastern campaigns, added new strength to Grant's forces. General William Tecumseh Sherman arrived from the west with divisions from the Army of the Tennessee. These were Grant's old comrades, men he trusted to fight aggressively. The Army of the Cumberland, once demoralized, regained its spirit. Fed and resupplied, they were eager to prove themselves after the humiliation of Chickamauga. All told, Grant now commanded roughly 56,000 soldiers around Chattanooga. Bragg, by contrast, had fewer than 40,000 Confederates, and those were stretched thin across the ridges and mountains that encircled the city. Confederate weaknesses. Bragg's position looked strong on a map. His men controlled the high ground, Missionary Ridge to the east, Lookout Mountain to the southwest, and the gaps that connected them. But appearances were deceptive. Bragg's army was riddled with problems. Many of his best troops had been detached with James Longstreet and sent toward Knoxville, reducing his numbers at Chattanooga. His remaining generals distrusted him, and discipline inside the Confederate camps eroded. Worse still, Bragg misjudged Grant. He believed the Union Army, fresh from near starvation, would not risk a major assault. Confident in his high ground, he failed to anticipate the bold strikes that were coming. Grant's approach to Chattanooga was straightforward but daring. He wanted to stretch Bragg's army and force him to defend on multiple fronts. Sherman would secretly move his divisions north of the city, cross the Tennessee River, and strike the northern flank of Missionary Ridge. Hooker would threaten the Confederate left by advancing toward Lookout Mountain. Thomas and the Army of the Cumberland, holding the center, would demonstrate against Missionary Ridge to keep Bragg pinned. But before the main attacks could begin, Grant needed a forward position, a place from which to observe Confederate movements and stage his offensive. That place was Orchard Knob. Orchard Knob was a low hill, sitting in the flat plain between Union-held Chattanooga and the looming height of Missionary Ridge. It was only lightly held by Confederate skirmishers. To most observers, it seemed unimportant, but to Grant, it was a perfect forward headquarters. From its summit, he could clearly observe Bragg's defensive lines and control the coming battle. On November 23, 1863, Grant ordered a reconnaissance in force, a probing attack designed to test the Confederate defenses and seize Orchard Knob. The men assigned to the task belonged to Major General George Thomas's Army of the Cumberland. For the soldiers of the Cumberland, the order was more than a maneuver. It was a chance to redeem themselves. Since Chickamauga, they had lived under the shadow of defeat. Now, with Grant watching, they were determined to prove their worth. At 1:30 p.m., on November 23, Union artillery opened with a thunderous barrage. Then, more than 14,000 Union soldiers stepped from their trenches and began marching in steady lines across the open ground toward Orchard Knob. Confederate skirmishers, surprised by the size of the attack, fired desperately. But the Union advance did not falter. The men moved with precision, bayonets fixed, flags waving. Two soldiers in Chattanooga, watching from behind, it looked like a grand review, a parade across the battlefield. Within 20 minutes, the Union troops had overwhelmed the Confederate outposts and swarmed up Orchard Knob. Rebel defenders fell back in confusion toward Missionary Ridge. Cheers erupted from the Union lines as Orchard Knob fell into Federal hands. Grant wasted no time. He immediately established his headquarters on Orchard Knob. From the hilltop, he studied the Confederate positions through field glasses. His officers joined him, sketching the ridges and noting artillery placements. The Union Army had now pushed closer to Bragg's main line. The Confederate High Command, startled by the boldness of the move, realized the Federals were no longer passive. Something larger was coming. Bragg responded by pulling more troops onto Missionary Ridge, believing this was the target of Grant's main assault. In reality, he had just played into Grant's hands. For the Army of the Cumberland, the capture of Orchard Knob was more than a tactical success. It was an emotional turning point. Men who had hung their heads in shame after Chickamauga now marched proudly. They had seized the hill in full view of Grant and the high command, proving that their courage was unbroken. One soldier later wrote, "The cheer that went up from our boys as we planted our flag upon the knob seemed to shake the very mountains. We felt that Chickamauga was behind us, and victory ahead." Inside his headquarters, Bragg fumed. He had underestimated the Union Army. He had thought them too weak to attack, yet they had just pushed his outposts aside with ease. Worse still, Bragg's officers continued to bicker. Some pressed him to counterattack, others urged caution. Bragg, indecisive, chose instead to strengthen his lines along Missionary Ridge. The Confederates, clinging to their high ground, did not yet realize that Grant was preparing a blow that would come from multiple directions. With Orchard Knob secured, Grant's gaze turned southwest. To the towering bulk of Lookout Mountain, its slopes rose like a wall above the Tennessee River, its summit often shrouded in clouds. Confederate troops held strong positions there, threatening the Union supply line and guarding Bragg's left flank. Grant ordered Hooker to move against the mountain. What followed would become one of the most dramatic and romanticized clashes of the Civil War. The battle above the clouds. But that was still a day away. For now, the Union Army held Orchard Knob, the Confederates clung to their ridges, and Chattanooga braced for the storm that was about to break.